Through bite-sized, epic reworks of Edward Grieg, George Friedrich Handel, Richard Wagner, and many more, the Ostrogothic Fantasy Orchestra has released a new album, Watch the Vatican, which is available now. Watch the Vatican includes 13 drummed-up tracks and will introduce the world of classical music to both young and old. Music is a great way to awaken sleeping souls and raise anyone's vibration to the next level. So head over to Gothochestra.com to listen now. If you like what you hear, consider purchasing a digital copy of the album on Bandcamp. That's Gothochestra.com. Gothochestra.com. And keep in mind, the monogram of the 9 is with us all the way. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today, my guest is once again Cory Hughes. First, I have a couple of announcements. I am hoping to start traveling for the docuseries within the next couple of months. I'm going to start through Texas and down to South Louisiana, where I'll be visiting family and doing a little filming. I eventually want to be able to travel across the United States and visit with as many of you as possible. Now, we are still completely self-funded, and we're asking for your help. If you would like to help with a donation, anything is greatly appreciated. And you can go to supportfkn.com, which is also right in the description. Cory, tell them a little bit about what they get if they donate $5 or more at supportfkn.com.
Sure. The biggest thing that you get, if you give a $5 donation, you get access to a whole bunch of JFK-related stuff that I've been posting, stuff about my book, but you also get access to the JFK supporter chat, where we can interact and I can answer any questions about Kennedy. And I've only got about 10 or 15 people in there, and there's only about 5 or 6 guys who actually post stuff, but we have a great time in there. It's really awesome, and it's really become a good repository of all kinds of information on all kinds of different subjects. So yeah, for even just a $5 donation, you get access to that, and you'll get a heads up and probably early access to my book when it's done and all that stuff. So it's definitely worth the money.
Definitely. And like I said, anything is greatly appreciated. That's supportfkn.com. Also, check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. This is also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. You'll find some of your favorite podcasts from our community, like Day Zero, Understanding Propaganda, Raised by Giants, and plenty more. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Odyssey, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Check out Rokfin. This is where you get the premium content. You also get all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin for only $10 a month. You can also create a free account, get access to everyone's free content, including all of our regular shows, just by going to rokfin.com/FKN+. That's ROKFIN.com/FKN+, or click the link in the description. Today I want to welcome back to the show Cory Hughes. He is a historian, researcher, host of Understanding Propaganda, co-host of Day Zero, and soon-to-be author. Cory, welcome back. How you doing?
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, man, this is going to be great. First, I want the audience to feel free to leave any questions or comments for Cory along the way. We'll try and get to those as soon as possible. And as usual, Cory is back to give us some updates on his progress with the book and some lesser-known facts that we need to understand about this complete picture, because it's a giant puzzle that we're trying to put together. How is the book going so far?
It's going actually phenomenally well. I have 8 chapters finished, and it's going to be 12 or 13 chapters. I basically have finished the entire second half of the book, almost. I have 1 chapter left to finish the second half. So I have the assassination, and then that's finished. And then after that, I have like the aftermath, all the crazy stuff that went on in Dealey Plaza, and a chapter called Oswald's Escape, the legend of how Oswald escaped from an assassination on public transport using a bus and then a cab, right? Like, give me a fucking break. It's the dumbest story ever. And so that'll be finished in the next week or so, and then that'll be the entire second half of the book done. I also have chapters finished on, well, I am about halfway done on my chapter on the Israelis, and then I already have the Oswald chapter done. I have my David Ferrie chapter almost done, my Mercenaries chapter almost done. So yeah, I'm like close to, I'd say, 3/4 finished. And so yeah, I'm hoping to wrap it up in the next month. I was hoping to get it done by September, but it'll probably be October. But it is it's good. It's really good. I'm surprised because I was wondering if I was going to be able to pull off explaining what I know in my head, right? It's because it's extremely complicated and there's a lot of jumping around and there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that are dependent on other pieces of the puzzle, right? So I thought there'd be a lot of jumping around in the book, but there's not. I got it flowing very nicely. I'm really kind of excited about it. It's looking like it's going to be over 500 pages when it's done. And then once that's done, I already have enough material that I've been researching to start another book right away. Or I could go the route of like Michael Collins Piper and put out like a second edition or a third edition where I just keep increasing, I just keep growing the book itself. But there's a lot of different ways that I can handle it. But what's going to happen when a book goes, we're going to do a pre-sale. As soon as it's ready to go, we're going to do a pre-sale for $20. And with that, you'll get the book and you'll also get my notes, which keep growing. They're about 750 pages worth of my notes. So you'll be able to like read through the book and then look at my notes and you'll be able to see the actual documents or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be great. I'm really excited. It's funny because I often go on YouTube and I look for JFK assassination videos and I watch them and I get so disappointed because you got guys who are still debating shit that's like 30 years old that I solved, right? It's like, God damn it. How fucking stupid are you people? It's really frustrating. I seriously think that like JFK researchers are like, they should be a protected class because they're so fucking retarded.
Oh man, I can't wait to get into this. So today we're going to be discussing more about David Ferrie and the Winterland ice rink. Is that correct?
Yes. It's funny. I
want to thank Any Word real quick. Tipped $2. Thank you so much, brother.
So I watched a video yesterday. A guy did a presentation on David Ferrie on some other Kennedy podcast, and he didn't even get the name of the ice rink right. He called it the Winter Garden Ice Arena, and I'm like, you fucking people. So today we're going to talk about David Ferrie.
Where do we start with this one?
Okay, so David Ferrie is Jim Garrison, who was the district attorney in New Orleans at the time of the assassination, and then in 1967, when he began his investigation into whether or not there was a conspiracy involving Clay Shaw, he considered David Ferrie to be one of the most important people in American history, and he was probably right. David Ferrie unquestionably was a longtime CIA. Joe Pesci did an amazing job playing the character. From people who knew David Ferrie, people have commented that Joe Pesci's performance was pretty spot on. Although that conversation that you just saw never actually happened. But what they did do was they took a ton of information about Ferrie and the mob and all this stuff, and they smushed it together. JFK is like the ultimate propaganda film because they give you all the good data and then they push you off in a different direction, right? So there's actually one scene in the JFK movie where Garrison's people are they're in a meeting and they're talking about Kennedy, and one of the guys is reading a newspaper. And if you pause the film on the newspaper, one of the top articles in the newspaper that the guy is reading is talking about Israel's nuclear project. Okay. So they give you all the good information and then they just brush right over it. Right. There are so many Easter eggs in the JFK movie of them like giving us the finger. It's fucking unbelievable. So
Yeah,
But
man, that was
David
a good movie.
Ferrie,
I'm gonna have to go back and watch that again. It's been years and years, but that clip just kind of brought it back, and I gotta go watch it.
it's a great movie. The conclusions that are drawn are all bunk. They never really mention the Israelis. They do actually mention a Centro Mondial Comercial, CMC, which was the company that the Mossad front company that Clay Shaw was associated with. That was basically the money funnelers for the assassination. They even Garrison in that film mentions that that company, which is really unusual. So, but just to give you some background on David Ferrie, and what I'm going to do now is you're all in for a treat because you're going to get a sneak peek of my book. I'm going to read you some of my chapter on David Ferrie.
Oh shit!
And all right, so I'll read you the first couple lines, so the first couple paragraphs, so you can kind of get an idea. David Ferrie fired the first shot from the corner of the picket fence. The shot struck Kennedy in the throat. This was observed by a witness sitting across the Stemmons Freeway named Ed Hoffman, and I'll play a video showing Ed Hoffman's testimony here shortly. In order to put the pieces together on this statement, one must first understand Ferrie's role in the assassination. In order to understand Ferrie's role in the assassination, one must really come to grasp David Ferrie's history, including who his associates had been throughout his life. One must also come to understand his motivations. Ferrie had been a rabid anti-communist, and like many others at the time, he felt that Kennedy himself was at least soft on communism, if not a communist himself. The story we've all been told about Ferrie is that he had no involvement in the assassination, and that other than a few shady characters he'd surrounded himself with, there is no reason to believe that he was involved in shooting the president. When one really comes to grasp who David Ferrie actually was, the official story version of his life becomes laughable. Many people are only familiar with Ferrie because of the portrayal of him in the Oliver Stone JFK film. The blockbuster movie was ultimately a finely crafted piece of propaganda. Joe Pesci, whom we all should be familiar with, did a fantastic job of playing the role of Ferrie, despite the fact that most of the conversations we saw on screen between him and Jim Garrison were works of fiction. Ferrie is initially dragged into the investigation the weekend after JFK was shot. He was ratted out to the FBI by another person featured in Stone's film, Jack Martin. Jack Martin is another one of these CIA spooks with a long and shady history, one that we will have to touch upon another time. For now, all we need to know about Jack Martin is that he was at the time an investigator hired by Guy Bannister to work cases for Bannister's private investigation business located at 544 Camp Street. This is the same private investigation office that purportedly Oswald was working out of when he was photographed handing out flyers for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Whether or not Bannister ever actually performed any private investigations here is suspect, as the entire operation screams as a cover for CIA Black Ops. Why would Jack Martin make that fateful call to the FBI to throw Ferrie under the bus? That is a question that still keeps me up at night. If Jack Martin had not made that phone call, who knows if Ferrie would ever have been dragged into the investigation to the depths that he was. Jim Garrison would have eventually come across the photo showing Ferrie and Oswald together at the Civil Air Patrol, and I'll show that here momentarily, indicating that Ferrie would still have come under some level of scrutiny. The real heat on Ferrie, in my opinion, stemmed from that phone call by Jack Martin, which indicated that he and a few boys of questionable age went on a road trip from New Orleans to Houston to go ice skating. This trip allegedly occurred on the day the president was shot and happened to take travelers through one of the worst thunderstorms in the recent history of the state of Louisiana. Kind of an odd time to take a trip, wouldn't you say? As we will see later on, the trip to Houston, as described, never actually happened. It was part of an elaborate cover-up designed to give Ferrie an alibi, as he was most certainly in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. So, that's the first page or so of my Ferrie chapter. Let me go ahead. I'm going to screen share and show you some pictures of David Ferrie.
Yep. And if anyone has any questions or comments in the audience, feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll get to them.
All right. So this is Ferrie when he was younger, probably in his 30s. The picture on the right, that hat is not a military hat. That picture was taken when he was working for Eastern Airlines. So Ferrie had been a CIA pilot going back to 1947, the first year the CIA was around. And the reason we know this is because there was a small airport in Venice, Florida, that kind of hit the media and was kind of brought into the limelight because of 9/11. A bunch of the 9/11 hijackers allegedly trained at a private airport in Venice, Florida. Well, the leasee of that same airport in 1947 was Clay Shaw. Okay. Clay Shaw had been gathering Cubans for an invasion of Cuba under Batista, right? So the previous dictator of Cuba, the CIA was out to get him, and that's why the CIA hooked up with Castro in the first place. They needed to oust Batista. And so going back all the way to 1947, you have witnesses who saw David Ferrie at the airport in Venice, Florida with Clay Shaw going back all the way to 47. And that tells me that he was a CIA pilot from day one. He wasn't in World War II. Well, see, here's the thing. His military record is all kinds of obfuscated. There's some indication that he did go through like basic training and he was in some sort of Army Reserve regimen, but nobody's dug up his military records, but he had to have done some kind of military in order to catch the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency. But this is David Ferrie when he was younger, kind of a normal, good-looking guy, right? But as he got older, through various drug use, usually whatever they called speed back then, he did a lot of speed, methane, or I forget what it's called, but there were pills, dextromethane or something like that. But over time, he kind of got to be kind of a haggard character, and you can see he started losing his hair. Many people, there's another one. The one on the left, he's wearing a wig. The one on the right is a wig also. And you can see the one discerning feature of him is that he has real heavy eyebrows. Okay. And why? Because he painted them on. So that becomes very important in the identification of David Ferrie in Dealey Plaza, his real heavy eyebrows. Because when you look like that, you're going to stand out like a sore thumb. Some people described him as looking like a sad clown, which is really kind of unfortunate. But this picture here was taken in 1954. This is at a Civil Air Patrol barbecue. Now, the Civil Air Patrol was like a way to bring teenagers into it's like an ROTC, right? But referencing like airplanes and stuff, right? So they would bring these kids in, teach them the basics of military stuff, teach them how to not really how to fly a plane. You couldn't get a pilot's license through there, but they would take them up in the airplanes, show them everything. And that is where David Ferrie initially interacted with Lee Harvey Oswald. It's Ferrie on the left, Lee Harvey Oswald on the right. So David Ferrie eventually gets kicked out of the Civil Air Patrol, probably, I believe, somewhere around 1959. And what does he do from there? He starts his own version of the CAP using forged CAP, Civil Air Patrol charter, right? So he creates his own branch of the Civil Air Patrol using forged documents. And it was called the Fighting Falcon Squad or something along those lines. Oswald was not involved with Ferrie at that time. And as far as we know, this is the only interaction that we have between David Ferrie and Lee Harvey Oswald that we can actually prove. So David Ferrie was in Dallas. He was one of the shooters on the grassy knoll. And I went over this briefly, I think one of the last couple times I was on the show, but I want to go a little bit more in depth into his role in the assassination. So let me stop screen sharing that. I'm going to play a quick film here. So David Ferrie he fired the first shot from the corner of the picket fence. This is observed by a guy named Ed Hoffman, who I'm going to play his statement now. This appeared on the show, the Men Who Killed Kennedy. It was a BBC show, came out in the early 2000s. And listen carefully to what Mr. Ed Hoffman has to say.
However, his story is confirmed by another eyewitness, Ed Hoffman, a deaf mute who is interviewed here for the first time.
I'd gotten off work early because I had a dentist's appointment. I was traveling down the freeway here, and I remembered that President Kennedy was coming to visit Dallas. I parked my car here. I realized at this spot that I would be able to see Kennedy pass close by. I stood here and waited, and I was looking towards where he would be coming from. I suddenly saw two men who looked suspicious directly over there in the car park.
25 years ago, these trees did not obscure the view. From his position at the side of the freeway, Ed Hoffman could clearly see the car park area behind the grassy knoll.
I saw a man standing here, wearing a black hat and a blue jacket. I saw a puff of smoke and I thought it was a cigarette, but it wasn't. He had a gun, and he walked towards the railroad. He tossed the gun to the second man. Then he turned and straightened his jacket, adjusted his hat, and walked casually away. The man with the striped shirt, the railroad shirt, walked over to the electrical box with the gun. He took the gun apart. He put it in a toolbox. He then walked slowly away in the direction of the railroad track. When the motorcade passed by below me here, I realized that Kennedy had been shot. I was horrified. I saw a policeman standing on the railroad bridge, and I tried to get his attention, but he didn't see me. So I got in my car and drove to the area where I had seen the two men. But there were so many people there, and I couldn't find them. I went to the FBI to tell them what I had seen. They didn't want me to say anything. They offered me money to keep quiet. They didn't understand that it was more important for me to tell them what I'd seen. It was hard for me to communicate with them. I do feel that the two men I saw were working together, and that the one with the gun behind the fence was the man who shot President Kennedy.
All right, so you have Ed Hoffman, who gives a really good description. Well, he describes a man in a dark blue jacket and a black hat, okay? This becomes extremely important because we have a number of witnesses describing the very same man, not only in Dealey Plaza, but also at the Tippit shooting, which we discussed on the last episode that I was on. So let me go ahead. I'm going to show some more photos. So this picture here was actually cut from a film, and this over here on the right, I believe that's David Ferrie. It completely matches the description as given by Ed Hoffman. And also from this, so Ferrie basically fires from the corner of the picket fence. He then casually walks away, like Ed Hoffman said, and then he ends up on the pergola right there. And then he casually walks back into the railroad yards, where a man matching the exact same description is captured on photograph here. So also in Dealey Plaza, he allegedly left New Orleans that day with two teenagers, Alvin Beaubouf and Melvin Coffey. Well, those guys, I found the photograph of them standing in Dealey Plaza, right? So he was most certainly in Dealey Plaza that day. Let me play one more video for you.
Hello, friends. Have you heard of PEMF, or Pulsed Electromagnetic Field Technology? I want to tell you a little bit about the Centropix Cloud. The Centropix Cloud is an at-home bioresonance frequency device. With the cloud, you can protect yourself and optimize your wellness anywhere you go. It supports molecular activation, energy, endurance, performance, rapid recovery, mental acuity, stress reduction, sleep management, deep relaxation, and much more. The cloud has the most effective frequency range of any at-home bioresonance frequency device. With the cloud, you'll experience up to 20,000 amplitudes per second through 8 large coils and reach a wider molecular range in the body. Regenerate your batteries and keep your inner vital forces at full speed with the Centropix Cloud. Just visit getthefrequency.com or click the link in the description to take control of your health today.
Stop screen share. And so after he leaves from the pergola, it's amazing that we really have this incredible record. I think I might have played this video before, but it fits the story, so I'm going to play it again. So from that time, from when he walks behind the pergola and then through the railroad yards, from then he is witnessed again. Notice the descriptions that are given by this witness whose name is Velma.
Let's go to our final caller with you, Alex. First time caller. Hi there.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I am Velma, and I live 100 miles from Dallas. I was living in Dallas at the time, and I had my car parked behind that Texas Depository book building.
Yes, ma'am.
I saw the shooter came out, and he had a very high-powered rifle. It was no bolt action, and
well, now, and let me ask you, please, because that rifle that they said Oswald used to kill Kennedy was apparently left upstairs.
It
so
was.
You're saying you saw someone else come out with a high-powered rifle. Okay, tell me what happened then.
Okay, I'm sitting in my car, and there's a gray, dove-colored old one-seated Plymouth car sitting there, and there's a man with a felt hat on with a wide band, and he had on
Plymouth?
a suit.
A man with a felt hat and a suit.
Black hair and real heavy eyebrows, and he'd look at me kind of dirty.
He had real heavy eyebrows.
Well, about that time, a police car come and told this man to move, and he didn't move right away, and the police got out of his car, and I know later it was Tippett. And he told him, he said, I said move that car. Well, then, this man that's in this old gray car, he went straight on around and went around this big building that was across the street from me. Tippett went the other way, so they must have met back there.
Did you say this to the Warren Commission, ma'am, or anybody else?
I haven't told anybody because I didn't want, I had 4 children I was having support then, and I didn't want to get shot. And I saw the man, and I could tell you how he's dressed.
All right, so that clip is from Coast to Coast AM, November 22nd, 2006. That person, Velma, called into the radio show on Coast to Coast AM and gave that little bit of testimony. So that is the only statement she's ever made. No one's ever contacted or identified her. I think I might know who she really is. Her name is Velma, and one of David Ferrie's closest associates was a guy named Bill Dalzell, who was partnered up with Guy Bannister at 544 Camp Street. But Bill Dalzell's wife was named Velma at the time. So is there a connection there? I have no idea. But why would a woman just be sitting in a car randomly behind the book depository while the president's driving by 20 feet away? Like, just sitting in her car? Really? That doesn't make any sense. So I think it's a possibility it might have been Bill Dalzell's wife, but I can't put Bill Dalzell in Dallas at the time. So from there, he leaves in the gray Plymouth. And the gray Plymouth is paramount because the gray Plymouth and a man in a dark blue suit are then seen again involved in the Tippett shooting, right? So that's the series of events that really took me like 5 witnesses and pulling pieces of their statement and finding the overlap, right? So the connection between Ed Hoffman and Velma was the black hat and the dark blue jacket. She then sees a guy inside the vehicle who's got the black felt hat with a wide band, and he's wearing a dark suit. Okay, so, and he's in the gray Plymouth. Okay, so we have the overlap from the statement of Ed Hoffman and the statement of Velma and the description of the individual. Then when we get to the Tippett shooting, we have a very similar description of the individual in a dark blue suit driving a gray Plymouth. You know, this isn't rocket science. It just takes a long time to kind of chip away at all the garbage till you can see what's really going on. And so David Ferrie fires the first shot. He then is seen by Ed Hoffman. He then walks through to the pergola, then cuts back through the railroad yards, and he ends up in the gray Plymouth where he's seen by Velma, and then he makes his way to the Tippett shooting. So after the Tippett shooting, and this is where things get really interesting. After the Tippett shooting, what you have is allegedly his alibi was that he was in New Orleans because allegedly he was at the trial of Carlos Marcello. Carlos Marcello was on trial for whatever, and you know how these guys operate. They're always found not guilty because they bribe the fucking jurors or whatever they got to do. But Carlos Marcello and everybody on Carlos Marcello's team says that they saw David Ferrie in court. Well, guess what? They lied. Alice Guidros, who is G. Ray Gill's secretary, G. Ray Gill is Carlos Marcello's lawyer, she says that Ferrie stopped at the office exactly at 12 noon. What is she doing? She's establishing an alibi for him. The next 2 days of Ferrie's life will be nothing more than establishing alibis, because allegedly he's in New Orleans and he leaves at around 6 o'clock at night, picks up the two boys, Alvin Beaubouf and quote unquote Melvin Coffey, who's just an alias for Leighton Martins, picks them up, and then they head through a bunch of little cities. They stop in Vincent and Kenner and a bunch of places along the way, and then they end up in Houston at like 4 o'clock in the morning. So that whole story is a bunch of fiction. Okay. David Ferrie was in Dallas. He was one of the shooters on the knoll, the second tippet shooter. And then when he flees from Dallas, he had flown in a plane, right? And he left driving a light blue colored Ford Falcon. And the story is that he went to the ice skating rink and met with Chuck Rowland and a whole bunch of people. And so I'm going to explain now that story and how it's completely bunk and who was really in charge of the Winterland.
Man, I want to get your thoughts on this real quick. It seemed back in that time period that the mob was a big deal, and you'd always hear things about, mob bosses being arrested. The mob did this, awful mob crimes. And it seems like today you don't hear that anymore. They probably seemingly have been integrated into more legitimized things to where the crime isn't as noticeable anymore. What do you think about that?
So the big change in the mob that occurred in the late 70s occurred after Meyer Lansky was basically on the run. So Meyer Lansky was the boss of all bosses of all time. He ran the mob from 1931 all the way till the late 1970s. After that was when Jews controlled the mob. That's a reality. I've talked about this a lot. I don't want to go into the full backstory, but Sicilians were front bosses. The real bosses, like in Chicago, was Hyman Larner. He was Giancana's boss, and he dealt directly with Meyer Lansky, right? Trafficante actually was close friends with Meyer Lansky. So Trafficante, who's not a Jew, he answered directly to Meyer Lansky just because they had a close personal relationship. And so there was no need for an intermediary there. But there were about a dozen Jewish mobsters who controlled the Sicilian bosses, all of them. Like there was no exception, really. And so Meyer Lansky, once he went on the run, the Jewish aspect of the mob had been building legitimate businesses for a decade. And so by the time Lansky went on the run, all the Jews had gone legit. And so all of the mob stuff fell back to the Sicilians. This didn't happen till like 78, 79. So then when you hear about like New York with John Gotti and all that stuff, and Sammy the Bull, like all that stuff really was in the 1980s and afterwards. That's when the control of the mob fell back to the five families in New York. So yeah, that's kind of how that went. So in this, what I'm going to show you now, I've never shown anybody on any video, and no one's ever seen this before. What you're going to see is some extremely rare stuff, and I'm the only Kennedy investigator who's ever gotten their hands on these pictures that I'm going to show you. Okay. So this is like a original patch from the Winterland Ice Arena, Houston, Texas. And this puts an end to the debate over the name because people call it the Winterland Ice Rink and all kinds of stuff. This kind of shows this is what it was really called, the Winterland Ice Arena. All these photos I got from a Facebook group that started in 2018. And if it wasn't for this Facebook group called Winterland Memories, I would never have been able to crack any of this stuff. It was so important for me getting into this Facebook group because some of the information that we're going to see here is just fucking unbelievable. And no other Kennedy researcher has ever even seen this before.
Yeah, man, I love that you go to the most obscure links to get information from like weird Facebook groups about Winterland Ice Arena to old newspaper articles, declassified information. Most people are just looking at this declassified stuff that came out and they're like, This is it. This is the answer. But you're like going way beyond that shit.
Yeah, so basically, here's the thing. Like, you could give me any document from any case, like Kennedy, Martin Luther King, whatever, from that era. And I could take any single document and end up coming up with a whole report just on what's inside each individual document. Because what I do is I go and I pull names and I look for known connections, right? Which Google is pretty good because Google doesn't realize what they should be censoring historically. And so you can find relationships really easily. Obituaries tend to tell the truth. And I have a couple examples that we'll go over, which told too much truth and basically helped solve the assassination for me. So when you're a CIA spy and you live a fake life and you have a real life, when you die, you're not there to write your obituary. So it's written by family and they write the story that they know without knowing your spy life, right? So it's amazing how what you can get from obituaries and then genealogies and old newspapers, right? I learned everything I know about Jack Ruby's brother Samuel from reading old newspapers of times he was arrested and stuff. I mean, really cool stuff. So this is like a little brochure. And the great thing about this is it has all these people's names in it, right? I'll show you. I have a bunch of rosters of hockey teams and stuff. On the right is Richard Rowland, who was the son of Chuck Rowland. I'll get to him here momentarily. But yeah, I found all of these were posted in this Facebook group by people who actually skated at the Winterland. Okay. So these are like, no one has ever seen these. These are gold. Like when I came across this stash, I fucking lost it. I probably spent a month just analyzing the names in all these pictures. So here, check this out. I got like Houston Figure Skating Club, a Spring Carnival 69, right? And I got all of these freaking names, right? Man, some of these names connect to intelligence. Right. These were just some random drawings that were done by students there. So this is interesting. The guy who was the main trainer there at the time of the assassination and after, for about a decade after, is this guy on the left named Larry Rost. Larry Rost was a French-Canadian figure skater. He was an Olympic gold medalist, and he was an associate, believe it or not, of Clay Shaw, along with, there was another ice skating guy, hockey. I can't remember his name offhand, but there was the head of a hockey team in Canada who was friends with Larry Ross, and he was also found in Clay Shaw's phone book. So you have some interesting connections to this Larry Ross guy. He also had some friends in New Orleans, and that are described as 3 gay boys. That's the only description I have of them, and that they used to do drag at a local drag show called Follies in Houston, right? So we got three gay kids coming over from New Orleans to hang out with Larry Ross and do these drag shows and stuff. Connection to our bunch of guys in New Orleans, I don't know, but I don't doubt it either. So here they have some more stuff like hockey, articles on hockey that was done there. More names. Here we go. Costumes and choreography by Joyce Rowland. Right. So yeah, this is like priceless. Here's some more stuff, some random photographs, more Houston Figure Skating Club, more names to research. Rulona Rowland, that's the sister of Chuck Rowland, or that's the daughter of Chuck Rowland, sorry. Here we go, more information on the hockey stuff. Here is on the left is talking about Mary Boots Roberts. We'll get to her momentarily. Lee College Social Club to have ice skating party, right? So this is just random stuff, but from a perspective of a historian, this is like, I can't explain to you how significant this stuff really is. It puts in perspective the entire trip to the Winterland, or alleged trip by David Ferrie, which never actually happened. So more rosters, more stuff like this. A postcard sent from one of the members to another member. I mean, this doesn't get any more rare than this. Pictures of people who were famous from there. And this one right here, this article right here is so fucking important, I can't even begin to explain. So Baytown Youth signs a contract with Ice Capades. Now, this is when I got through this and came to understand what it really was, it blew my mind. So it's unusual for a person to be hired by the Ice Capades after only 6 weeks of ice skating experience, but it's doubly unusual when that person is a native of Baytown, where about the only ice is in the refrigerators. Okay, so this is basically this guy Glenn Harper, who's 18 years old, whose father is a supervisor at Humble Oil. Okay. So let me explain this. Humble Oil is Prescott Bush's company. George Bush worked for Humble Oil for many years. Jack Valente worked for Humble Oil. George de Mohrenschildt worked for Humble Oil. Humble Oil is a big fucking deal back in the 1950s and 40s and during that era. So this kid who's a skater, an ice skater at the Winterland, had only been ice skating for 6 weeks. Okay, 6 weeks. But then he gets hired by Icecapades, which was the biggest ice traveling show in the country. And his father happens to work for Humble Oil. What is the implication here? The implication here is that guy couldn't fucking ice skate himself, period. He couldn't ice skate at all. He was just a fucking guy. But his dad worked for Humble Oil. And I promise you, this kid, Glenn Harper, was probably involved in intelligence some way, because when you look into like Icecapades and Disney on Ice and all this stuff, what you'll find is that all of them have connections to the CIA. And my belief is that all of these ice skating, traveling, touring productions, just like the carnival circuit, were all being used by the CIA to smuggle guns and to smuggle drugs. And so I thought, when I read this article about how one of the ice skaters from the Winterland got picked up by Icecapades after having only picked up a pair of ice skates 6 weeks prior, no, sorry, you got to be a pro to make it into Icecapades. This guy got hired because of his connections through his father to Humble Oil for some nefarious purpose. So, allegedly, when Ferrie gets to the Winterland, which is the day after the assassination, right? He drove in on the day of the assassination, but the next day he meets with Chuck Rowland. And now this is official documentation, and they're calling him Roland Charles Rowland. But that's not his real name. His real name is Roulon Chuck Rowland. Okay. Why they would brush this over, I don't know. The weird thing is about Chuck Rowland is that if you go to archive.org and search the name Chuck Rowland, you'll find a 400-page CIA file on an alleged spy named Charles Chuck Rowland, spelt the same way, Rolland. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of that? Slim to none. So there's way more to Chuck Rowland than we know. And the Winterland at the time was owned by, or was leased by a couple. We'll get to the owner here in a minute. It was leased by a couple named Mary Boots Roberts and Ronnie Roberts. But Roberts is an alias. Ronnie's real last name was Robert's son, and I determined Roberts was a stage name. But the weird thing is, when you look into her obituary, she actually uses Roberts, not Robert's son. So when you're a spy for the CIA, you know, who the hell knows what your real fucking name is?
It's crazy how many ties Hollywood and celebrities have with like intelligence and three-letter agencies and shit.
You got to remember, back to Goebbels' principles of propaganda. All propaganda must be controlled by a central entity. That's the CIA. So any place that we're going to get propaganda, other than like advertising propaganda, is going to you're going to have the seal of approval from upstairs, right? From the Central Intelligence Agency. That's why Jack Valente ran Hollywood through the MPAA for 40 years at the behest of the CIA, right? Jack Valente controlled everything that went on in Hollywood. Every movie that got made, every penny that got spent on any kind of entertainment was controlled by Jack Valente. He worked for the CIA for 40 fucking years. Okay. So yeah, the CIA is not going to allow dissident
and they had the Gong Show guy. They had that lady who was a chef. What's her name? Shit, I forget her name.
Julia Childs.
And, Julia Childs.
Chuck Barris.
Yeah, man. And, you know, you go to modern age. What's the dude who played Batman? Affleck.
Yeah. And then Marky Mark.
Yeah. And they're, you know, all, of course, ties with
Marky Mark is probably the biggest propagandist in fucking Hollywood. That guy is like, everything he does is like pro-America. Fuck yeah. You know, it's like, whatever, dude.
Fucking president of Ukraine. Jesus.
Oh, I know. Oh, dude. Yeah. I like when he plays the piano with his dick. That was kind of funny.
Talent.
So Mary Boots Roberts, fascinating individual. Mary Boots Roberts, white. I don't know where she got the white from. I can't find her being married to anybody named White. So Mary Boots Roberts White passed away on Saturday, the 29th of November. Beloved mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother and friend. She accomplished much in her life, became a professional ice skater, and worked for NASA during the Apollo and Gemini missions. Okay. So we got this lady who's running the Winterland, who then goes to work for NASA. But you know what? I dug through the Apollo and Gemini mission information. Her name doesn't appear anywhere. It doesn't appear at all. It's just not even there, because NASA was an intelligence front for the CIA, and they would put people on payroll so they could go out and do spy stuff. That's kind of how that worked. Oswald had 4 fellow employees of Riley Coffee Company who all went to go work for NASA or Michaud or Boeing from working at Riley Coffee. So yeah, the aerospace was a good cover for CIA spy stuff.
Faker than space, man. Faker than space.
So this is where it starts to get really good. She is preceded in death by her parents, Joe and Corinne Caltagirone, and her brother, Joe Caltagirone. Okay. So what we can derive from this is that her birth name is Caltagirone. Her parents are Joe and Corinne Caltagirone, and her brother is Joe Caltagirone. So she's obviously Mary Caltagirone at birth. She happened to have a cousin on her father's side. Her father was Joseph Sr. Joseph Sr.'s brother was Vincent Sr., and Vincent had a son named Vincent T. Caltagirone Jr. Okay, so Vincent T. Caltagirone Jr. is Mary Boots Roberts' first cousin on her father's side. Now, this is where it starts to get really good. When you dig through Vincent Caltagirone's obituary, what you'll see is that after graduating from St. Thomas High School in 1943, Vincent attended Texas A&M University, followed by an enlistment in the U.S. Navy. Okay, so we've got naval intelligence. All right. Upon discharge, he received his bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, which is where Jack Valente went to school, followed by 35 years in the insurance business. Now, that statement is an outright lie. Vincent was a board member of the National YMCA Scuba Program. One of Vincent's recreational diversions was teaching scuba at the Houston Downtown YMCA. That becomes key here momentarily. And Vincent was a member of St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Church, as well as Sacred Heart Society of Little York. So on a lot of these spooks who are unconnected all over the place, I've found in obituaries that they were a member of St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Church. So there's some weird, shady shit going on with Vincent de Paul Catholic Church. Definitely. Vincent is preceded in death by his father, Vincent T. Caltagirone Sr., and his mother, Carolyn Caltagirone. Vincent T. Caltagirone Sr. was the brother of Joseph Caltagirone, who was Mary Boots Roberts' father. This is where it gets, there's some obfuscation here, because the next line says, he is survived by his wife of 50 years, Roberta Bobby Caltagirone. And then it mentions his sons are Tom Caltagirone and wife Lou Caltagirone, and their grandson, Jack Caltagirone, who was the son of Tom and Lou. Okay. This is extremely fucking important because the mother of those children is not Roberta Bobby Caltagirone. That was his second wife. The children came from his first wife. Okay. And his first wife was born Lorraine Valenti. And she later on in life went on to be Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. But for a time, she was Lorraine Valenti Caltagirone, married to Vincent Caltagirone Jr. And the kicker here is her brother is Jack Valente. Okay. So Lorraine was preceded in death by her loving husband, Ted Dinerstein, her brother, Jack Valente, and his wife, Mary Margaret Valenti. So it's definitely Jack Valente's sister, and her parents. She is survived by her son, Tom Caltagirone, and his wife, Lou, and their son named Jack. All right. So go back to Vincent. His sons were Tom Caltagirone with a wife named Lou and their son, Jack. Okay. So this relationship, they went to great extent to hide the relationship between Vincent Caltagirone Jr. and Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein for obvious reasons. Okay. It becomes really fucking important later on when Jack Valente is in the White House and basically forced out of the White House in 1966. And I'll tell you, and I'll get to that here momentarily. So then when you look into the Jack Valente file, you'll find this, talks about his relatives, Joseph Valente, age 67, Josephine DeGeorge Valente, mother, age 61. But for some reason, they redacted the name of his sister, who is Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein at the time, age 38, all of Houston. And in the column here, they have the name Vincent. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. To me, that was the icing on the cake, connecting Mary Boots Roberts to Vincent Caltagirone Jr., to Lorraine Valenti, and ultimately Jack Valente from there. And now let's take a look at see who owned the Winterland ice rink. Okay. So this is from that group that I was in. This was posted by Richard Rowland, who was the son of Rulon Rowland. And it says, "This is my mom, Joyce Rowland. I saw some previous posts where there were questions about who owned the Winterland ice rink. Her recollection is that the Johnson family built the building at the rink." The Johnson family, okay? They owned the multi-story building across the street that fronted Kirby and other real estate throughout Houston. Yes, the Johnson family enterprise, who at the time of the assassination was owned by who? Lyndon Baines Johnson. And who is Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man? Jack Valenti. So you have this incredible, fucking just unbelievable series of relationships between Mary Boots Roberts. So let me start at the beginning. You have Lyndon Johnson owns the Johnson Family Enterprise. Johnson Family Enterprise owned the Winterland. The Winterland was leased to Mary Caltagirone, aka Mary Boots Roberts. And then her cousin was Vincent Caltagirone Jr., who was married to Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein, who is the sister of Jack Valenti, who is the right-hand man of Lyndon Johnson, right? So you have this closed loop of interaction here between these four people: Lyndon Johnson, Jack Valenti, Mary Boots Roberts, and Vincent Caltagirone Jr. It's absolutely stunning. And then, let me see if I don't know if I have it. Yeah, we'll go into it here coming up. So it's extremely important. The relationship between Vincent Caltagirone and Jack Valenti will be extremely important, and I'll show you why. Okay, so this is from the FBI file on David Ferrie, and it talks about his trip allegedly to the Winterland, where he met with Chuck Rowland and all this stuff, but he never actually went there. And we'll get to that here coming up. So there was a local call made to the number MO 4-3581. And nowhere in any JFK researchers' files will you find that number identified. Why? I don't know. It's 2022. It was easy for me to find that. I think I found it in like 5 fucking minutes. I went to newspapers.com, right, where I can search old newspapers, and I put that phone number in quotes, MO space 4-3581, and guess what I found? I found that phone number came back to the Gateway Swim and Skate. Now, when you, let me see if I can find it here. I'm looking for one in particular.
While he's looking for that, want to remind anyone in the audience, you have any questions or comments, anything at all, leave those in the chat and we will get right to them. Stolen documents.
I can't seem to find it. I just saw it yesterday. So, but here, I'll explain. So David Ferrie, when he's interviewed about his trip, he gives all the wrong answers. Like, where did you stop? When did you stop? And he got the order of where they stopped allegedly all wrong compared to everyone else's testimony. And then when asked what he did in Houston, he tells them that he had gone to the Bel Air skating rink. Okay, the Bel Air skating rink, extremely important. He says he went to the Bel Air. He hung out for about an hour. And he couldn't find the owner to talk to him about anything, and so they then left. Well, in 1959, the Bel Air skating rink became the Gateway Swim and Skate. Okay, so there's so much that can be gleaned from his statements. Him, number one, giving the name of the Bel Air skating rink when he was actually at the Gateway. What that indicates is that David Ferrie had been making runs for some nefarious purpose from New Orleans to Houston at the Bel Air skating rink. And that means that he'd been doing runs there since a minimum 1959, right? So he knew everybody involved in Houston. He knew all these people at the Winterland already. And how I know that, because the Gateway Swim and Skate, and when we look at Vincent Caltagirone's obituary again, it says that one of Vincent's recreational diversions was teaching scuba at the Houston Downtown YMCA. Well, guess what? The Downtown Houston YMCA is the Gateway Swim and Skate, which basically rebranded sometime in the 1970s. Okay, so Vincent Caltagirone, the phone number that was called from the motel, right? So this phone number here, MO 43581, it went back to the Gateway, and the phone call was made from the motel that allegedly David Ferrie stayed at to the Gateway. Why? Because that must have been where Vincent Caltagirone was working prior to them rebranding it the Houston Downtown YMCA, right? So the next thing that's important, they stayed at the Alamo Motel. Okay, this is a post that I found on like a Houston architecture fucking forum, like some obscure Houston architecture forum. And this was a killer statement because I don't think most people realize this. Besides the fact that that phone number went unidentified, nobody knew it went to the Gateway except for me. This statement put everything in context. This is somebody that posted this in 2011. It said the Gateway pool opened in 1959. That was right after it was the Bel Air. I was 10 at the time, and they had this huge grand opening, and my parents bought me a season pass. Our house backed up close to it. I would ride my bike through the vacant lot next to our house, and it was just on the other side of the Alamo Motel. Okay, so the Gateway was right next to the Alamo, where these guys allegedly stayed, right? So they go to Houston. They have this weird appearance of supposedly David Ferrie at the Winterland where they talk to Chuck Rowland. And remember, Mary Boots Roberts is the leasee, and it's Vincent Caltagirone is her cousin, right? So they go there. They then from there, they stay at the Alamo Motel, which is right next to the Gateway. And then from the Gateway, from the Alamo, they're calling the Gateway, right? So what's the common thread among all these places that they're visiting? Vincent Caltagirone Jr. Okay. Now, why on earth would they be going to so much trouble to try to get a hold or contact Vincent Caltagirone Jr.? And the answer to that is because Vincent Caltagirone Jr. was in fact the short tramp in Dealey Plaza. And we know this is the fact. We know this is the case because James Earl Ray identified the short tramp as Raul. Okay. The Raul who set up Martin Luther King. And through completely unrelated means, I was able to identify Vincent Caltagirone Jr. as the real Raul. And so the real kicker to this whole thing is when you look at a picture of Joyce Rowland on the left and Mary Boots Roberts on the right, that is the same fucking person. That is the same person. So allegedly sometime in the late 1950s, early 1960s, the Mary Boots Roberts and Ronnie Roberts gave up running the Winterland and turned it over to Joyce Rowland. But that's the same person. The hair is identical. The picture on the left looks a little older, perhaps. Who knows? Look at that like double freaking turkey neck that she's got. It's the same. It's identical. It's the same fucking thing, right? So like this is the same fucking person. So the whole story about Joyce Rowland and Chuck Rowland and all that, I don't know what the fuck's going on there, but this is the same person. At some point in time, when you leave the CIA, you have to I guess you need to kill off your alias, right? They got to come up with some way to do it. But yeah, that is the same person for sure. Now, David Ferrie never went to the Winterland. And so we're going to talk about what Ferrie actually did. So Ferrie was obviously in Dallas. Okay. He had flown in his plane. And then actually on the day of the assassination, a Dallas police officer by the name of Joe Cody, who was a very close associate of Jack Ruby, and also allegedly the man who purchased the gun that Ruby shot Oswald with, right? So allegedly Joe Cody buys the gun that Oswald is killed with, and he gifts it to Jack Ruby, and then Jack Ruby uses it to shoot Oswald. So there's a very close relationship between Jack Ruby and Joe Cody. So Joe Cody, on the day of the assassination, he's in Shreveport, Louisiana, for some reason, right? He gets involved in a plane crash on the ground, right? So I guess he lands the plane and then he bumps into another plane while they're both on the ground. Nobody's hurt, planes aren't damaged, but it was enough to get a report filed, okay? When he gets back to Dallas, he wrote this over the top story on why he went to New Orleans, right? So whenever someone's guilty, they'll tell you way too much information. Seriously, when someone's honest, they're like, I didn't fucking do it, fuck off. And when you're guilty and lying about it, you're going to come up with an elaborate story, which is exactly what he did. He came up with this 4 fucking page report on why he had to fly a plane to New Orleans, to Shreveport that day. So basically the point I'm making is that David Ferrie flies into Dallas or Fort Worth 2 days before the assassination. And that's testified to by Jack Martin. We know he was there because of the statements made by Jack Martin. And so, but then he doesn't fly his plane out. He ends up leaving in a light blue Ford Falcon station wagon. So now the reason that we know that he never went to the Winterland ice rink. And that the person who actually went to the Winterland who said that they were David Ferrie was actually a guy named Sergio Arcacha Smith, who was probably one of Ferrie's closest associates in New Orleans in regards to the assassination. He was also the shooter on the roof of the book depository. So we have this statement here. Allegedly, the night of the assassination, remember, he's driving to Houston from New Orleans, and he gets in about 4 o'clock in the morning. But then we have this statement. It says, check Daily Star, Hammond, Louisiana. This is from the Garrison files. Supposedly a graduate student, presumed Southeastern, says Ferrie hid out the night of the assassination in a dorm room in Hammond. There is an airport in Hammond, also the home of Shaw's mother. Athletic director Grady Martin might have some information. Well, guess what? There's no information on Grady Martin. I probably spent a couple days or a week looking for anything I could find on Grady Martin. Doesn't exist. Anything that he might have given to the cops back then has been disappeared from history. So the night of the assassination, he's not in Houston. What he does is he actually leaves from Dallas in a light blue Ford Falcon, and he drives to Hammond, Louisiana, where he stays with a guy named Thomas Compton at Southeastern University in Hammond. That's what Ferrie does. Now, we have the statement from Thomas Compton, who lies about the whole thing. He was in on this, or at least he was in on giving Ferrie a cover after the assassination, right? Establishing alibis is everything, okay? So Mr. Compton continued to state that on Sunday after the assassination at 5:30 a.m., he was awakened by Dave Ferrie in his dormitory bed at the University of Southeastern in Hammond, Louisiana. Mr. Compton stated that until this day, he is uncertain how Dave Ferrie located him on this date. At this time, Dave Ferrie was in hysterics and near tears as he stated, "The police are at my home and they've taken some of my things." Compton stated that Dave Ferrie did not elaborate on my things and stated that Ferrie also related that he didn't do anything wrong. The two talked for a while on different unrelated subjects, and then Ferrie made 2 calls to New Orleans, and Compton believed they were to G. Ray Gill. And Compton stated that Dave Ferrie left approximately 8:30 a.m. the same morning, and it is believed he returned to New Orleans in a Ford Falcon station wagon painted light blue. Compton stated Dave Ferrie did not tell him he had been to Texas. Okay, total fiction. And this is where Thomas Compton screwed up. Thomas Compton says that Dave Ferrie shows up at his place at 5:30 in the morning on Sunday after the assassination and says, "The police are at my home and they've taken my things." Well, guess what? That's complete BS, because that didn't happen till Monday. That didn't happen till 20 hours later. It was not Sunday. It was Monday, just past midnight, that the cops show up. So how David Ferrie could make this statement, or how Compton could make this statement to the FBI or Dallas police or whomever, stating that Ferrie showed up 5:30 in the morning, freaking out about his things, it's complete BS, because that incident where the cops show up at Ferrie's home didn't happen for another 20 hours. So Compton's definitely lying. And we also know that Compton is lying because of Compton's roommate, a guy named Frank J. Chalona. Now, this is some of the best, this is probably top 5 statement in all Kennedy assassination research. It's got to be one of my favorites. He just completely debunks the entire statement by Chalona, and he basically debunks the entire Winterland story as well. So in the fall of 1963, my roommate was Thomas Compton. We were residing in Holloway Smith Hall, Southeastern University College. I think that on approximately November 22nd or 23rd, he told me that a friend of his would be staying in our room. Okay, so there's advanced knowledge, right? He told me that a friend would be staying in our room. So Compton knew in advance that David Ferrie was showing up there. And that's in contradiction to Compton's statement where he says that Ferrie just showed up at his room, right? So we got that lie busted right there. The reason for this person staying was said to be so that he could be where many people could see him. Okay, so he's there to establish an alibi, but I don't know what the hell went on with this. Why would they do this to establish an alibi and go to the Winterland? It doesn't make any sense. It could just be to confuse everybody. I was told his name was Dave. I don't remember for certain whether I was even told his last name. I was told he was a psychologist. Now, when you go into the phone book for New Orleans that year, you'll find David Ferrie is listed as a psychologist in the phone book. Weird, huh? So it's definitely the same Dave we're talking about. And this kind of locks that in. On the 23rd of November in the afternoon, or perhaps the evening, I went to my room and found the man sleeping in my roommate's bed. Okay. What happened on the 23rd? David Ferrie was supposed to be in Houston at the ice rink sometime between 3 and 5 p.m. All right. But he can't be there if he's sleeping in Thomas Compton's bed. How far is Hammond from Houston? Got to be 3, 4, 5 hours, something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So on the 23rd of November in the afternoon or perhaps the evening, I went to my room and found this man sleeping in my roommate's bed. His back was to me, so I couldn't see his face at the time. I noticed, however, that he was sleeping fully clothed and with his hat on. At this time, I also noticed that his hair was very strange looking. I believe that I was introduced to him later on in the evening, but I don't remember the nature of the introduction or what was said, except that not much was said at all. I asked my roommate about this man, and in particular about his hair. I was told that he was bald and that he pasted theatrical hair at the point where his hat met his head. I am not certain that he spent the entire night in the room or that he even spent more than a few hours in the early evening. The next time I saw him was Sunday morning in the lobby of the dormitory. It was very crowded as everyone was watching the funeral on television. I don't believe I saw him anymore after Sunday morning. Later that day, my roommate told me that Dave had gone back home. I don't know how he got home. Perhaps my roommate drove him. Well, that's a mistake. The funeral was actually on Monday, the 25th, and the official story has David Ferrie staying in Hammond that Sunday night and leaving Monday morning. So yeah, so basically David Ferrie was there all weekend, except for with one exception. So this is the actual Ferrie timeline. Ferrie was in Fort Worth on 11/20 as per Jack Martin. And then Ferrie was in Dallas on November 22nd, where he was a shooter on the grassy knoll and a shooter of Tippett. Ferrie hid out in Hammond the night of November 22nd, 63, as per the Garrison memo. Chelona sees Ferrie sleeping on Saturday, 11/23/63 in the afternoon or evening in Hammond, and this confirms that Ferrie never went to Houston, period. It was all about establishing an alibi. Then, after he gets up on the 23rd, that Saturday night, after the day they were supposed to be at the Winterland, David Ferrie drives from Hammond, Louisiana, down to Galveston, and he does that so he can check into the Driftwood Motel. We have his registration and his license plates on the check-in, so we know that he was there, right? So he was seen by Frank Chelona in the afternoon or evening, 5:23 on 11/23, the day after the assassination, when he's supposed to be in Houston. Then he drives down to the Driftwood Motel, checks in, registers the car on the room, and then the timing of Compton's statement, putting him back in on Sunday at 5:30, that completely coincides with David Ferrie leaving from Galveston after he checks into the hotel, and he checks into the hotel for Sergio Arcacha Smith, Alvin Bobouf, and Leighton Martins. He then drives back to Hammond, Louisiana, where he then is seen by Thomas Compton. Okay, but Compton lied. He was in on this whole cover-up. So, and then Chelona puts Ferrie in Hammond on the 25th in the morning during Kennedy's funeral, and then Ferrie is in New Orleans and meets with Garrison on the 25th, right? So Garrison has no idea how close he came to solving the assassination. He had David Ferrie in his office, like we saw in that scene, just a couple days after the assassination, okay? So yeah, Garrison came so much closer than he ever realized. And then we have, let me see. Yeah, this is showing that shortly after midnight, these officers went to 3330 Louisiana Parkway, knocked on the door, and the same was opened by a subject who identified himself as Alvin Bobouf. Okay, so the officers requested the present whereabouts of David Ferrie, blah, blah, blah. Basically, this is them showing up at David Ferrie's house or his apartment Monday, just after midnight, right? So it was 20 hours after Compton said that he was complaining about his things being taken. No, the cops didn't show up until Monday. So Compton was a liar. He was placed under arrest, and this is talking about Leighton Martins and Alvin Bobouf, because they got arrested also. He was placed under arrest, and the officers went up to the second-story apartment where they found Leighton Martins seated in a chair. The subject was questioned, and he stated that he was presently living with Ferrie. However, he did not know the present whereabouts of Ferrie. That's because Ferrie, at this time, is still in Hammond. However, he did not know the present whereabouts of Ferrie. Martins was placed under arrest, and the officers instituted a search. In this residence was found a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber with a 5-inch barrel, 6-shot revolver, and it's got all the information there. So, and I think this is the last slide I have, and that's that. So basically, David Ferrie shoots the president. He gets in the Gray Plymouth. He then drives over to the Tippett shooting. He's one of the two shooters of Tippett, along with Kerry Thornley. He then flees to an address, 5818 Belmont, which is in northern Dallas, which is the police show up there because they get a call that a guy got out of the vehicle with a rifle. Now, that's a different person. That's David Wayne House. David Wayne House was actually arrested. But We know that David Ferrie at some point makes it to this house because the cops give a description of a light-colored Ford Falcon station wagon in the driveway when they respond to this house. So at some point, David Ferrie makes his way to the 5818 Belmont address, gets the Ford Falcon, drives to Hammond, Louisiana, where he shows up sometime in the middle of the night, however long the drive from Dallas to Hammond is. And that's what David Ferrie did. So he eventually, once the investigation kicks off, he dies. Okay. So the weird thing is his death is ruled by the coroner as natural causes, but he left 2 suicide notes. Yeah. Really strange. Okay. The interesting thing about Ferrie's death is he blackmailed Carlos Marcello after the assassination. Okay. So if there's one way to guarantee your death, it's to blackmail Carlos Marcello. All right. So what he does is he writes a letter. People wrote letters back then. It's quite odd, but he writes a letter to Carlos Marcello basically saying, I did so much for you. I did this. I did this. I did all kinds of stuff. And you fucking screwed me, man. I got nothing. I live like a bum. I need $50,000 or else, people might learn things, is basically what he writes in a letter to Carlos Marcello. What are you, stupid? You don't do that. Okay. After that, Carlos Marcello gives him $50,000 and he takes that $50,000 and he opens a gas station. Of all things, he opens a gas station and his partner is Alvin Bobouf. Okay. So yeah, it's, I think the gas station had it only lasted like not even a year before it folded. But my money is on Marcello killed him. Okay. You just don't blackmail a guy and think he's going to forget about it. Right. So yeah, David Ferrie, very key person in the assassination. He was connected to basically all the guys all the shooters he knew because he was a mob guy through Carlos Marcello, and Marcello would send him to go fly runs to go meet with people and as a messenger and a courier. And so throughout his working with Marcello, which lasted for 2 or 3 years, he basically got introduced to all kinds of people. You've got Frank the Irishman Sheeran, who basically in his book, I Heard You Paint Houses, he basically says he knew Ferrie and he had met with Ferrie a couple times and that he actually delivered 3 rifles to Ferrie in a duffel bag about a month before the assassination or a couple months before the assassination, right? So David Ferrie knew all these fucking mob guys. It's wild. So yeah, he was a far more important person in the assassination than anyone gives him credit for. If you really don't think that he was in Dallas, then if he was involved in the assassination, he was in Dallas. Like the two are inseparable. If you don't think he was in Dallas, then he couldn't have had any part in the assassination. Really. It just happened to be all of his guys that he knew in the book depository and on the knoll and everywhere else. At some level, at some point, he had to have been connected to Jack Valenti through Jack Ruby, because Jack Ruby and Jack Valenti, they knew each other growing up. They were running pornography between New Orleans and Houston on behalf of Carlos Marcello. Those guys had to have known David Ferrie at the time also. And so Jack Valenti must have known him probably under an alias. But so, yes, that's basically what I wanted to go over today and show how important David Ferrie was. And that is that.
I love it, man. Way to dig deep. Thank you, Joshua. That's what he says, and that's what I say as well. Any Word has a question here. Why did they even take Oswald into custody? It seems it would be just easier to kill him before.
Right. He was supposed to die in the Texas Theater. Plain and simple. The gun, he didn't have the gun, okay? Oswald never owned any gun. When you look into the stories of how he got the rifle, allegedly, and how he got the handgun, it doesn't make any sense. And then it turns out the handgun that he allegedly had on him had a modified barrel. The gun that I just mentioned that they took from Ferrie's house in New Orleans, that had a modified barrel also. So could it have been the same gun? Who knows? No idea. Yeah, so he was supposed to die in the Texas Theater. And how do I know that? Because in one of the photographs of the Texas Theater outside, you've got one of the costume people wearing the robes. So, that tells me everything. That tells me that he was supposed to die there and it just didn't happen for some reason. Yeah. And so let me explain what happens next. So after he gets arrested and didn't die, Jack Ruby makes a call to Los Angeles. He calls a guy named Al Gruber. Al Gruber was the right-hand man of Mickey Cohen. Al Gruber had also met with Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir in Los Angeles 3 weeks before the assassination, and then drove to Dallas to meet with Jack Ruby. Immediately after Oswald's arrested, Jack Ruby picks up the phone, calls Al Gruber. It is at that moment that Al Gruber gave Jack Ruby the order to kill Oswald, because it was supposed to happen in the theater and everybody would have been cool. The cops killed him. Nobody's going to ask any questions. Would have wrapped the whole thing up nice and neat. But since that didn't happen, sending Jack in on the 24th was like an audible. It wasn't planned or anything. I mean, the 24th, the coordination between moving Oswald and him getting shot, totally coordinated by a guy named Gerald Butler. Or George Butler. I'm sorry. George Butler was Jack Ruby's oldest friend in Dallas. And he was the head of the police union at the time, but he was a Dallas cop for 20, 30 years. Definitely on the take through Chicago mob. So yeah, George Butler ends up letting Jack Ruby into the basement to shoot Oswald. And, it was Samuel Ruby, Jack Ruby's brother, who went and bought the money orders. Right. So that's how that got pulled off. But yeah, crazy stuff. David Ferrie, super important guy, overlooked by the majority of American history. And that guy, man, people never understand how important he actually is. Hopefully they will when they read my book.
Yeah, man, I love it. So you're thinking somewhere around October, right?
Yes, I'll be done. I'll be done with the actual writing in the next month or so, and then I'll have to do the formatting and the editing, and the thing I'm dreading the most about that part is my references. Because I literally have hundreds and hundreds of references. And right now I just have brief notes. I have them stuck in a sentence, like this is where this reference is. So I'm going to have to go back and research all of my references just to be able to write up my reference page. So that's the part I'm really dreading. Everything else should go fairly quickly. But yeah, it'll definitely be out in the next month or two. So,
and everyone check out his website, coryhughes.org. Also, if you want to help us in any way with donations for the docuseries or to help finish this book, please go to supportfkn.com, and you will get tons of awesome information as well from that. Cory, this was great, and we'll be talking again soon before the book comes out to give another little preview of it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then. Do you want to learn how to remote view? Now is your chance. The International Remote Viewing Association is offering 8 weeks of remote viewing classes instructed by my friend Michelle Freed. Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Starting Saturday, September 3rd, 10 a.m. Pacific. The course is only $150, and for members of the IRVA, it's only $110. Just visit irva.org/events/registration to sign up now.